Okay, let's keep reading the Slime Squad versus the Fearsome Fists. We are up to Chapter 8. Plog in Danger. Plog took his time on his way back to his sewer. He didn't like the idea of returning to the dank darkness, so he made the journey last several days. It was nice outside, the rubbish was pleasantly smelly, and there weren't many monsters about. His golden shorts sparkled in the sunlight through his threadbare waistcoat. At night, he used them as a pillow. Every time he fell asleep, he woke up hoping that the fight with the fists had just been a bad dream and that the slime squad was still together. Sadly, the dreadful events of that afternoon had been all too real, and the fists were growing bolder. On the second day of his long walk, Plog had found a discarded newspooper, Daily Pooh's Fist of Terror, reporting that the fists had robbed 5 more rank banks, leaving a trail of terror across the land. And on the third day, he'd overheard a radio bulletin. Confident that nobody would dare to challenge them, the fists had robbed a terrifying total of 12 rank banks in as many hours. It was getting so that decent, law-abiding monsters were scared to go out on the streets. So that's why it's deserted around here, Plog thought with a shiver. It was a shiver that grew ever shiverier as he remembered the newsreader's closing comments. No one knows why the fearsome fists are robbing quite so many rank banks. No one has seen them buy anything. Their getaway vehicle has been spotted most commonly in the area of the Tin Can Mountains. Where I live, Plog breathed. Looking around, he realised he had reached the rusty outskirts of the district, and suddenly he remembered the giant handprint on the wall of his sewer, and the huge hole he had found there. It could only have been made by the fists. But those clues had been left before the robberies had begun. What did it all mean? Plog's thoughts were interrupted by a piercing scream from behind a nearby stack of cans. Sounds like Mrs. Bumflop, he muttered. She must be in trouble again. He quickened his step, old tin crumbling under his metal boots. Then he was thrown to the ground by an explosion somewhere close by. Black smoke belched out into the air and several giant cans toppled over, rolling down the rusty slope like unstoppable steamrollers, straight towards Plog. Is that right? He scrambled up, just barely dodging them, and the golden shorts fell out of his waistcoat. Without really thinking, Plog pulled them on over his head. He heard the scream again. It doesn't matter if I can't save the world, he thought, breaking into a run. I'll settle for saving Mrs. Bumflop, or anyone else in trouble. But as Plog pounded around the corner past an extra-large can, he felt his blood start to freeze. Knuckles and his fearsome fists had blown up the rank bank closest to Plog's home in the sewers, and were seizing wads of filthy banknotes in their fat, sweaty fingers. Mrs. Bumflop had dropped her startled aunt, and Nail was holding her around the waist. "Stop your caterwauling," he growled, "or I'll squeeze you like a stuffed prune." "Let her go," Plog shouted angrily. At the sound of his barked command, Nail jumped in surprise. Knuckles turned, and the other blistered, blotchy fists looked up with grim and gruesome expressions. Plog gulped, but knew he couldn't stop now. "You heard me," he went on, with a wobble in his voice. "Let her go now." Nail's mouth twisted into a leer. "Who's going to make me?" "I will," Plog yelled. He picked up an old ring pull and flicked it through the air. To his amazement, it stayed right on course and caught Nail bang on the knuckles, breaking his hold on Mrs. Bumflop. "Run," Plog told his old neighbour, scooping up her aunt and plonking it in her arms. "Hide in your house and don't come out." "Good advice," snarled Knuckles, lumbering closer as the grateful monster madam fled for her life. "Shame you didn't take it yourself." "We don't like nosy Parkers sticking their snouts in," growled Palmer. He paused. "Or do I mean snouty Parkers sticking their noses in?" Whichever way, we don't like it, croaked Pinky, the fist with the running red nose. Actually, we don't like anything, added Forefinger, his long-fingered friend. Well, I don't like you robbing all these rank banks, said Plog, so why don't you give back the money and push off? We don't take notice of anyone but Lord Cluck, growled Knuckles. Lord who? Is he your boss? Plog folded his arms. Well, you just tell him that if he keeps sending you lot to rob rank banks, he's going to be in a whole heap of trouble. I've got a better idea, Knuckles rumbled. Why don't you tell him yourself? Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Plog caught movement. He whirled round to find Knuckles' mum sneaking up behind him. Bam! She dived forward and Plog was struck by a half ton of wrinkled, warty flesh. The world spun like a Catherine wheel through his head and he crashed to the ground. When Plog's senses switched on again, he found himself in the clutches of the fearsome fists. He was being dragged through a damp, dark and strangely familiar tunnel by Pinky and Palmer. This is my sewer, he realised in a daze. Maybe Knuckles and his gang aren't so bad. They're taking me home. But the fists passed Plog's forlorn, soggy shoebox without a second glance and hauled him further into the shadows. With an icy pang of fear, Plog recognised the large fist-shaped hole in the sewer wall as he was bundled through it into the space beyond. Properly awake now, he realised that the slime squad weren't the only ones with a hidden HQ. This dark concrete cave had to be where the fists hung out in their spare time. Their van was parked in one corner. It must have driven on ahead, so stuffed full of loot there was no room for passengers. Heavy-duty hammocks hung between sturdy poles so the fists could catch some shut-eye. Massive stacks of cash had been piled against the walls in whiffy heaps. A battered smelly-vision set perched crookedly on top of a pile of rancid rubbish. The whole place was revolting, even by monster standards. To think the fists were my neighbours and I never knew it, Plog scowled. They had most likely chosen this location for the same reasons he had. The sewer was close to civilization and yet hidden away from prying eyes. But while Plog had dreamed of living with normal monsters, the fists wanted only to take from them, and here was the perfect place from which to whiz out and cause trouble in the world outside. So you're awake, growled Palmer in Plog's ear. Why have you brought me here? Plog demanded. Knuckles waddled up, his scuffed, calloused fingers flexing like overstuffed elephant trunks. To talk to our boss, of course. Lord Cluck, said Plog nervously. Forefinger pressed a big red button on the smelly vision. Immediately the screen started to flash black and red as Plog watched a dark shape appeared, the sinister shadow of a large bird-like creature with a curved, cruel beak and a wobbly bit on top of its head. Your lordship, said Knuckles, and Plog was sure he detected a note of fear in the fist's gruff voice. We've got one of your enemies. He was with those slimy idiots who tried to stop us at Rank Bank in Broken Furniture Valley. Ah, yes, said the figure on the screen in a throaty, half-strangled rasp. The fool who fought alongside the insufferable slime squad. How kind of your friends to stay out of my way. That's what you think, Plog retorted. They're planning something that will stop you in your tracks. Just you wait. I think I will be waiting for a very long time, Cluck hissed, and sadly your membership of that silly squad will buck brief. Knuckles smiled. Why do you want us to do your very important business? Lord Cluck rounded on him. I want you to send all that lovely looted lolly to my evil experiments lab right away. I need the cash if I am to conquer all Trashland. Plog gasped. Pi had been right about the evil monsters wanting to rule the world. Why do you want to conquer Trashland? He demanded. That's for me to know and you to completely fail to find out. Lord Cluck gave a chilling snigger. All those who oppose me must perish. Take this fool outside, round up a crowd, contact reporters from Smelly Vision and the newspapers, and then, while the whole world watches, flatten the furball. Splatten him. Make a hairy pancake out of him. Let every monster in Trashland know Let every monster in Trashland know the dreadful fate that befalls those who dare to stand up against me. Brilliant, your super holiness, Knuckles beamed, his blisters glowing red with mirth. After a show of strength like that, no one will dare to interfere with your plans. The other fists laughed too. Plog couldn't believe his long furry ears. You evil monsters! Yep, Knuckles' mum agreed happily. Now you heard the boss, lads. Let's take this furry dope outside and deal with him permanently. Chapter 9. Seconds from splatting. Plog felt panic rise up inside him as he was marched back out into the sunlight. The fat, chafed fingers of Nail and Palmer locked onto his arms. He knew he was doomed, but what scared him even more was knowing that no one in Trashland could stand up to the full furious might of these evil fist monsters. Not now the Slime Squad had given up. No, he told himself firmly, I'm not giving up. There must be something I can do. He racked his brains for ideas as the fists dragged him through the dented streets of the Tin Can foothills. Ahead of them, Knuckles, Pinky and Forefinger were hauling monsters from their rusty houses, ordering them to come and see the gruesome Squash the Plog show, and due to start any time now. Knuckles' mum was on the phone to the monster media, urging them to get their top reporters down here for a story they would never forget. Then Palmer and Nail came to a halt. Plog watched the frightened crowd start to form around him, close to the very spot where the Slime Squad had saved Mrs. Bumflop's aunt just a few days ago. Once he would have felt uncomfortable with so many strangers staring at him, but now things had changed. He was tired of being a victim, stuck alone in the dark. He liked it outside, and he liked Trashland the way it was. How dared Lord Cluck and his fists think they could ruin everything? He had to get away and make Zil, Ferp and Danjo see that Lord Cluck and whatever he was planning needed to be stopped. But how? How will he do it, boys? Look at the furry freak, sneered Forefinger, trying to act brave when he's shaking in his boots. Plog gasped. Boots! That's it, he thought. The one thing that might just save me. Knuckles turned to the scared-looking crowd, rounded up by his hench fists, and the gaggle of goggle-eyed reporters who just sped to the scene. Plog noticed Mrs. Bumflop cowering helplessly at the back. Listen up, ye miserable lot, Knuckles roared. This furry orange bear rat with the dumb shoes has tried to mess with our plans not once, but twice. He has failed, and now our master, Lord Cluck, wants to make it very clear that anyone who tries to resist us will not live to regret it. A gasp went up from the crowd. The reporters swapped shocked looks. My friend Palmer here is going to climb up one of those cans, jump off and squash this interfering fur ball flat. Knuckles wore a big grin on his face. Flatter than a flatfish run over by a steamroller with a nuclear rolling pin. The crowd gasped again as Palmer started shinning up a lemonade can, his fearsome fingers piercing the rusty metal as he gripped it. Forefinger took his place, holding on to the struggling Plog. Watch me, bellowed Palmer. I'm going to leave him as flat as a cannonball. A cannonball isn't flat, called one of the reporters. It is when I've finished with it, Palmer boomed, reaching the top of the tin can. Stand by for squashing. Wait, Plog yelled. Don't I get a last request? Knuckles' three eyes narrowed. No. It's an easy one, Plog went on quickly, and it's really Palmer I'm thinking of. Won't you let me take off these stupid big boots of mine? I wouldn't want him to hurt himself on the sharp edges while he's squishing me into monster paste. Ah, Palmer looked pleased. How thoughtful. Very well, Knuckles agreed grudgingly. Slowly, his heart pounding, Plog prized the iron cauldrons off his feet. The crowd fell deathly quiet. Palmer flexed his blotchy, calloused fingers, getting ready to jump. Come on, Plog hissed to his feet. Come on. Then suddenly, the choking, smoking, super stench of Plog's foot slime was wafting up into the air. Nail and Forefinger staggered backwards and knocked into Pinky. Knuckles and his mum keeled over, gasping for breath, and the gathered crowds groaned and backed away. But for once, Plog was delighted with the reaction, especially as Palmer was so busy spluttering and wheezing he lost his balance and toppled from his perch. Ah! He plummeted through the air and landed nails first on a pile of rusty cans with a splintering crash. Did it! Plog cried. He jumped back into his boots and raced away up the nearest rusty hillside, the angry shouts of the fists clamouring behind him. He picked a path through the cans that towered and tilted all around. If he could only lead Knuckles and his knuckleheads away from the innocent crowd so that no bystanders got hurt. However, Plog was barely halfway up the hill when tough, blistered fingers closed around his legs and brought him crashing to the ground. It was Pinky, his nose red and running, his mouth twisted into a smirk of satisfaction. Bad luck for you. I've got a cold, he croaked. Can't smell a thing. Plog tried to pull free, but Pinky's grip was unbreakable. He could see Knuckles and the rest of the fists lumbering towards him. There's no escape this time, Plog thought. I've had it. But suddenly a streak of gold, iron and yellow came whizzing over the top of the hill. It landed on top of Pinky, who got such a fright that he let go of Plog and jumped in the air. Plog scrambled up and stared, astounded at the frog monster in the metal pants and the crash helmet riding the thrashing fist like it was a bucking bronco. Ferp! Yes, my dear Plog, it's me, Ferp beamed, and I didn't come alone. Plog did a delighted double take as a thick strand of slime shot out from behind a can further up the hill, lassoed Pinky and spun him round and round. Zill! Who else, Fur Boy? She leaped out from behind another tin and fluttered her eyelashes. You were doing fine, but we figured you wouldn't mind a little help. Ferp jumped clear as she tugged hard on the slime line, sending Pinky spinning off out of control until a pincer punched out from behind a nearby can and blasted icy slime at him, freezing him onto the spot. Danjo tore his way out of the can and smashed his smaller pincers right into the fist monster, shattering the ice and knocking the big bruiser flying. Ferp punched the air. Let fear disappear, the slime squad is here. Zill and Danjo joined in, and so did Plog, his ears standing up proudly through the leg holes of his golden headgear. Not you jokers again! Knuckles looked at his fellow fist monsters and laughed. We took you apart last time we tangled. Don't you know when to give up? We certainly do, Ferp informed him. Never! That's what we came by to tell you, Plog, said Danjo excitedly. You were right. We could just drop out the moment things got tough. That would have been way too sensible, Zill agreed wryly. But you were ready to fight again, Furboy, even though you got totally trounced. Knuckles nodded and smirked. Twice. But Plog came back fighting, Ferp shouted back, and so have we. Guess we're like you after all, Furboy. Yep. Zill grinned at him. Except, obviously, my feet are way cuter. They won't be when we've finished with them, Knuckles and his fellow fists stamped forward threateningly. Even with Pinky and Palmer in a daze, the four of us can bat you into oblivion. We'll see about that, Thumbface, Plog growled back. It's time for the final fistfight, and the winner takes all. Fury burned in the fist's fierce little eyes. Then, with a brutish bellowed war cry, Knuckles led his followers in a mad scramble up the rusty slope to get to the slime squad.